Massive welcome to our subscribers, first-time viewers and LinkedIn members to a second part of fraud of accountability for companies and CISOs, in part occupational hazard or broken compass with Steve Hindle and Paul Dunlop. And in this panel session, we're going to continue to unpack the recent announcements from the SEC of fraud charges against SolarWinds and their CISO and some of the developments and commentary we've heard since the enforcement was announced. Stay with us to learn about the implications for both companies and executives looking forwards. But before we bring them on, firstly, apologies, bit of a cold, not feeling my best, so you might hear me drawing in some breaths on this show today. You can't catch it through the camera, so it should be okay. For those that are new to the channel, I'm your host, Simon Linstead, and by sharing stories and best practices over the last few months, it's led to over 130,000 views here on YouTube. By you, our amazing 8,162 subscribers. So a huge thank you for your engagement. And thanks to your support, it's also led to the launch of our in-person community-driven events in both the UK and US this year, with a focus on knowledge sharing, networking, and definitely no sales pitches. And with 24 events planned across the UK, US, and United Arab Emirates in 2024, it's a very exciting time. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, link to our event site is in the description below. But meanwhile, back in the community, we still have study groups, mentor sessions, and regular networking sessions to help you raise your game in cybersecurity. So make sure you check out the community if you haven't already. And I should have a QR code I can bring up now. Seamless this is. Here we go. And again, if you'd like to support the wider InfoSec Live community, or indeed buy me a cheeky decaf coffee, we do have a way you can show your appreciation here on YouTube, with 3 tiers of membership allowing you to show your support in any way that you can. But whether you join or not, being here and engaging with our content is what really matters. So if you're watching this live, please do like and subscribe. We want to make these events as interactive as possible, so make sure you also drop any questions you may have in the chat. Okay, time for the show. Let's Simon stop rambling on with his hoarse voice and bring Steve and Paul on. Here we go. Welcome, gents.
Cheers, Simon.
Thank you, Simon. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Sorry for my wheezy intro there. It's been better.
I heard you were breakdancing on the floor while we were off camera, but it's okay.
Yeah, I was about
maybe it was all the dancing before, while I'm now sweating and struggling to breathe. Thanks again for taking the time to come on. For those that didn't watch the last episode and don't know who you are, can I get you to do a quick intro? And I'll start at the top with you, Mr. Hindle. In fact, I'll move myself down here. How's that? There we go.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let me tell you about Paul Dunlop then. How's that sound?
Love it.
Paul is my tea time buddy here in the greater Tampa Bay area. So he's already on it now. I have to admit, I'm supping the water because I've had far too much coffee this morning. And yeah, so Paul is the Chief Operating Officer, COO for Fraud Doctor. Fraud Doctor is a professional services firm based here in Tampa, Florida. And what Fraud Doctor does is it advises organizations, both public, private, about their management of fraud risk. I've been working with Paul for years now. Paul's joined Fraud Doctor in 2018. But on top of that, he has over 2 decades of in-house industry experience designing fraud and risk management programs across all of the global banking and insurance sectors. He's also got a prior career in law enforcement as a Bobby. And earlier this year, Paul and the Fraud Doctor team launched an incredibly groundbreaking Shota signal analytics platform, which is like the Minority Report for detecting fraud risks and accounting fraud and financial misstatements of companies from the outside in.
Can you do this?
So that's right.
Thank you, Steve, for that wonderful intro for Paul. I think it's your turn now, Paul, to do the same for Steve.
I feel like I should be standing, Simon, with a microphone up front, looking back to the curtain. Steve Hindle. Steve's the founder of Achilles Shield, a global cybersecurity consulting firm, likewise in Tampa. And for those of you local, Steve is on the other side of the Hillsborough County border, and I occupy the north side in Pasco. So we're conquering Central Florida together. And Steve, of course, is well known for many, many characteristics, but most importantly, he generates real value for his clients in identifying lean programs that protect the future. And I think I'm honored to be sitting here, not on the first panel this month with Steve, and we've had some really good conversations. And Simon, all credit to you for kicking them off. Everybody knows what kind of leader Steve is. You're going to get fact to reality and really objective thinking of where it comes from. You're also going to know that Steve is a seasoned 20-year plus, I'm not going to age you too far, Steve, who's been in different aspects of the business. And I think those aspects give him real viewpoints that we're going to bring today. Of course, Steve's got a great sense of humor. He has some specific training in there, so I'm going to have to try and dance him a little bit on the comedy side. But Steve, I'm going to leave it to you. You've got one announcement you want to share directly that I don't have in my head that I think is good news overnight. Is that correct?
Oh, I appreciate that. So on the subject of protecting your future, which is what drives Achilles Shield, that's our mission statement, and it really is delivering everything that we do. We care, right? We're trying to make a difference, and I'm really excited to announce a partnership with a massive bunch of difference makers with this firm over here, Spirion. Spirion and I are working together. Myself in an advisory practice as a chief security and compliance advisor. And we're effectively looking at data security, data protection, data identification, Spirion and its privacy grade data discovery and protection platform. So the red-headed stepchild, everybody forgets about the data, right? And so let's see what 2024. Let's see what we can bring. So.
Very exciting. And for anyone who wants to know more about Spirion, I have dropped what looks like a suspicious link, but it has just been taken.
Looks fishy. Looks fishy. Does that?
Look fishy. Click it if you dare. If not, just Google Spirion. I've noticed we've got some questions in already. You'll notice the chat isn't up on the screen today for those watching. Basically, because there's three of us, we end up about this big, and with my eyesight, I can't see anyone's facial expression. So do drop your questions in. I'm going to try and leave them to the end because we have actually, believe it or not, because Steve and Paul are here, we've got some structure to this today and I want to try and stick to that. So
shocking.
Oh, I know, right? Everyone knows it's not me, but
it's fuck all to do with me. It's all Paul's. Let's be honest. I'll drop the first F word today. Structured? No, don't do well with that. Yeah.
Well, look,
rules are for fools. Here we go.
This is the second session we're doing on this, and I know that both of you have spoken on other panels about it since. The first question I want to ask is, why do you both care so much about it?
I'll take that one, maybe. Steve, maybe I'll take that one. Well, first off, Simon, I don't think this will be the last of this conversation, right? And I'm literally looking up here because there's announcements coming out from the SEC today, right, about cyber disclosure. So we're trying to stay current. Well, by the time most people hear this, it might be next week. Second, frankly, I've been troubled by some of the things that I've heard from people you would think would say more objective things in the industry over the last month. Some descriptions about where the rules are, how CISO should play, and frankly, some outright deflection from some of the main issues. And I don't think that's helpful. And for me personally, Simon, I think there is still some growth to be had in the cyber community of really getting comfortable with the F word, right? Which is why we've made a little fun of it in today's title. It's a space that most cyber folks don't get to live in, like fraud folks don't get to live in the cyberspace often. And I think the industry is still struggling a little bit of how to use the word, know what it means, and then frankly deal with the accountability that maybe some folks are on the wrong side of the line and need to get back inside the line, right? And
well, some folks don't even know where the line is, one would argue.
Exactly. And I think honestly, Simon, there's a lot of reaction still going on, right? A lot of emotion still in the air about it. And I think for young folks, and I think for folks who are in your space looking for different understandings and how to think about it, we wanted to come back today to sort of talk about some of the questions we got offline, some of the crazy things we heard, that I think need myth busting, and then just to sort of set people up with how to think about what they see and hear over the next few weeks as this story continues.
Thank you. I think the most telling thing out of that is the face cream must be working, because you just used my name and young folks in the same sentence. So thanks for that. Steve, anything to add?
I feel ancient today. That's what I
Me
like.
too, mate.
Why do I care? I care because I'm I'm actively involved in the wider CISO community. I've been a CISO, I've been a CIO, I'm still a CISO for several organizations that I work with as a partner. And really importantly, it's that people need to understand the ramifications of what they say out there in the public sphere, and not only that, but we need to get the industry, the cybersecurity industry, right? The industry in general. We need to get the industry a lot more comfortable discussing terms that can often put people on the spot, can often be quite embarrassing and uncomfortable and nasty. But front and mind, front and center is everything that we're talking about, we're hearing about with the SEC, SolarWinds, all this kind of stuff. I think 3 people over the course of the warm-up and the chat today have mentioned about the 2 words that I think, like military intelligence and, dirty underwear. You should never put them in the same sentence, right? It should be, we should stop talking about CISO and scapegoat. I think we need to stop that. I think we need to put the brakes on, and we need to understand, just like Admiral Will McRaven, one of my favorite books back here where my thumb is pointing, make your bed. And when you make your bed, lie in it, right? That's not Admiral McRaven's message, but make your bed. But then as a CISO, if you're going to make your bed, be prepared to lie in it, be accountable, accept the accountability of that. And we need to stop playing the blame game and looking at it and going, oh, they're just blaming the CISO. The CISO is the scapegoat officer, chief information scapegoat officer. Stop it.
I agree.
Stop it now. It does nobody any favors, and it just paints yourself as the ungrateful victim for the bollocks that you say in public forums. So that's where I'm going to pack it. And that's why I'm passionate about this. Because if we get people to understand that, and we get people to admit and own that, then maybe we can help them protect themselves from themselves.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Steve. And I think, you summarised one of the points we talked about before. But do you want to summarise the last lessons, what we got out of it, the learnings, before we move on to today's discussions?
Hit it, Paul.
Well, I think in a nutshell, right, Simon, when we sat here 4 or 5 weeks ago, everybody was reacting to, hey, there's an SEC enforcement, right? And it's a civil action. It's not a fraud action. It's a civil action. And it's about, the CISO specifically right now, at least, there may be others, being called out for making statements to the market and to investors that were visible to investors. And then ultimately the SEC's position, of course, is there were different conversations going on inside SolarWinds that were inconsistent. And as we talked, I think before, that gap, ultimately SEC's point is those statements are misleading. And I think there's a lot of debate there about, whether the SEC is a suitable referee for that sport, whether really they should be looking at cybersecurity. We'll talk into that more. But I think the other things that came out of it are, I think, Steve, you made some great points last time. There are different kind of CISOs. So when we talk about the CISO is, it sometimes loses the nuance for people who are not in the industry of, we've got those in-house defensive CISOs, right? The block and tackle folks that are doing things. And then there's a different flavor to those folks that are very far from the defensive in-house and are selling security to other people and to the supply chain. And arguably this particular enforcement is one of those type conversations. And then the last thing I want to say is, I think there's a tremendous amount of confusion in the way that this thing was first reported about, hey, this is like the Sullivan case. No, it's not criminal. No, this is like that. No, it's not. Hey, fraud only applies to public companies and securities. No, it doesn't. So a lot of people grappling with what is this thing that I don't understand very well. And for those who didn't watch it, maybe have a look at that. But I think that is the basis of where we left off, including, hey, come to forums like this and get some opinions on the outside of the industry for people who are genuinely trying to help the industry get a better sense of what's going on and what to learn from it while it's still playing out.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and I'll tag on to that. Don't want to dive in too deep again to echo Paul. I think it's valuable. You really want to dive into a few bits of the ins and outs of the SolarWinds and Sunburst debacle from a technical perspective or a cybersecurity perspective. I mean, I'm not going to belabor that today. Go watch the last session, right? But importantly, everybody's looking at this like it's over. Like SolarWinds and Sunburst was a one-time event. Please note, the same bad guys, and I say this term really rarely because they're all cartels and people move around, and just like you change jobs, threat actors change organizations, right? It's all outsourced. The state-linked cyber actors behind SolarWinds right now, and US authorities, CISA, they're raising the red flags right now to say, hey, we've now got a new attack vector, a new set of CVEs released. I'm getting all technical, I'm trying not to, around JetBrains and Team City, because the same bad guys that caused all this pain with Sunburst are gearing up right now with JetBrains and Team City vulnerabilities to do it all over again. So if you haven't, as an organization, if you're watching this and you're maybe in security within an organization, or if you're an organization who's watching this, get ready and start looking, because you already know these vulnerabilities are out there. And if you're not doing your best to fix them right now and treating them with the appropriate level of criticality within your organization, there's nuances to that, you're already going to be behind the curve when the same bad guys that caused all this pain start to launch their payloads. Nothing you can do at that point. So cut the bullshit now. It's already out there, right? You know me, I'm a sunshine yellow kind of guy, right? I am never alarmist. I'm not being alarmist here. I'm telling you, take this seriously, because Sunburst was not a one-time deal. It's going to happen again. Be aware, because JetBrains, Team City, all of these pieces right now, the same bad guys are looking at it going, people aren't patching their shit. Let's go. All right. I mean, that's what you got to do. We're always going to be behind. Cybersecurity is going to be behind the bad guys. So I'm telling you all now, if you're listening to this, don't be behind the bad guys. There's no excuse for it. Fix your shit. Thanks, parking that was a little bit about the SolarWinds piece, how it all plays in, why it's relevant today, why we're still having these conversations today. And certainly as CISOs and cybersecurity leaders and leaders in our organizations, we need to be aware about the statements we're making, because everybody's going to ask you, your clients are going to ask you, hey, SolarWinds, Sunburst, SEC, also JetBrains, Team City, we're hearing about this. Where are you at with it? You turn around and go, we're fine. Be aware of the implications of what that means.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, but since we did the last show, what have you heard that's caught your attention since the enforcement announcement? I'll go to you, Paul, first.
Yeah, please, because I almost grabbed it off Steve when he said it a moment ago. I mean, even now, think about the things that you're writing and saying publicly in response to this show, in response to other webinars you go to, in response to, while you're out there trying to learn, naively asking questions about stuff. Think about how you ask the question, right? You don't want to draw attention towards you. That's the point Steve made in the last show. I think second, be curious, but be critical in your thinking about what you hear. I think, if I'm not wrong, Simon, Joe Sullivan was out at Black Hat in EMEA, and I think Joe is trying to do the right thing. You know, from I see the public comments he's made about, you know, getting to terms with what happened to him. But around those conversations, I also heard some of these statements. One specifically really troubled me of, you know, it's not a breach if you get the data back. Like, you know, I see Steve's head, you know, and for somebody who oversaw in the sort of second line oversight of cybersecurity and CISOs and risk managers, that one made me go look at the NIST webpage and go, hang on a minute, did someone change that when I wasn't looking? That one was a doozy, right? That was an absolute doozy. Like somehow if the water gets out of the dam, you put it back in, it wasn't a flood. He's like, come on, guys. So I think those are curious statements that speak to, and we'll talk about this maybe more, Simon, about why people say this stuff, right, to defend others. There are statements that are being said that are self-serving or well-intended, but frankly, they're crackers, right? Most people know that, but some people don't, or they get led into thinking, well, maybe it's not entirely that, but maybe somewhere in the middle is okay. And no, it's not, right? We all know what a breach is. Yeah, there's different laws about it and different interpretations, but fundamentally, you know, get clear on the block and tackle. Because I think the Steve sort of tip off a moment ago, if you go out there and start repeating some of these crazy statements, you could be sitting down in a year's time being asked, did you really believe that that was okay when you were just goofing around? Did you really think that way? Is that why you didn't fix your cybersecurity program? Is that why you responded the way you did? and all of a sudden those kind of cheering for the other side and the underdog becomes, hang on a minute, you're the underdog. And so I'd say, be careful about those kind of statements. I think the second thing I wanted to add, Simon, is, and I get it, right? I've lived in organizations where other risk and compliance professionals were in the hot seat from the DOJ and from other regulators. And you feel for them, you really do. But at the same time, you also see these statements of, well, my company doesn't have me as a CISO, let's say, sign off on Sarbanes-Oxley or, financial disclosure things. And if I don't have to do it, then I'm telling you, nobody has to do it. And I kind of look at that and I go, well, that worries me a little, because just because one company has not asked somebody to do it doesn't mean that's the rule. So as always, right, trust, but verify. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about this, Simon, of some of those wild reactive statements. We're here to squash them down a little bit before they catch fire, and maybe put a little bit more substance in front of folks to help them think through where the rule really is. And more importantly, see the risk arriving before they get right up against the you're in the foul box rule, right? How do you get there, and how do you start talking your way away from that? So
Thanks,
go ahead,
Paul.
Steve.
Yeah, no, I can't. I mean, damn. Paul, out of our little double act here, Paul's the more eloquent one. I feel like I'm Bobby Ball and you're Tommy Cannon, mate. I can't top that, right?
Who's that? Who the fuck does that make me then? Don't answer
Jimmy
that.
Cranky.
Just don't. Yeah, I knew you were going to say.
And the terrible British 1970s. That's beautiful. Terrible British 1970s bad comedy moments. I say that because I can't put that any better. And to Prashant's comment, I'll leave that alone. Braces means something else over here, mate. Suspenders, they call it, which means something else back home. And I won't tell anybody I'm wearing suspenders outside of the US. Maybe I am. So on that note, I think the key piece to also consider since then, people talk about it. I've been on several webinars listening to Joe Sullivan speak, right? I mean, let's put this in context, right? It's not behind bars, right? Everybody called Joe Sullivan as chief scapegoat officer. Here he is. He's the CISO of another organization now, and he's doing great, right? But put this in context. That's not what we're looking at here, and it's not where we're looking at in the future, right? I mean, let's be fair. I've been known to wear a lot of things, Prashant, not just at the weekends, pal. So that's where you've got to look at it, and you've got to focus on what does it do with your organization, right? Your data, your posturing, your positioning of how secure you are. How fragile you make your ecosystem by the statements that you're making, right? We talked about this. We talked about risk management. We talked about fragility. We talked about the brittleness of overstating and not doing the fundamental blocking and tackling, right? You're introducing brittleness and fragility into your organization, and you're doing the same with your statements, not just for your company, but for your reputation, right? I mean, that's important.
100%. Paul, anything to add on that while I frantically look through my notes to see what the next question is?
No, you're good. You're having a Vicks moment. It's okay. I think
Paul, can we really dive in, if you don't mind, if it works for you? But can we actually really dive in on some of these pieces about it's not a breach if you get the data back? I know you touched on it really briefly. I ran a tabletop for a massive global coffee organization. I'll leave it at that. 2 days ago, right? And it came out during all of that about, for instance, you're in the middle of an exercise, or worse, you're in the middle of an incident. And we had legal counsel on that. And they turned around and at one point said, at what point are we calling this an incident? Is it an incident yet? Now that's an incident, not a breach, right? The B word carries so much legal ramifications. People don't like using it. As soon as somebody says B word in the middle of an incident or an exercise, everybody goes, because it carries ramifications. So at what point do you declare an incident? At what point do you declare a breach? A breach of what?
Yeah.
Data breach is different from system breach, controls breach. There's a million different breaches out there, right? From a cybersecurity perspective. But I absolutely cannot support Sullivan's statement. I can't. Joe, it's F word Friday. Joe fucked up. Joe fucked up by making that statement. And anybody who looks at that, reads it and goes, oh, I'm going to do that too. No, I don't think so.
I think I've even got the source for that here. Let me just drop that in.
Bearing in mind what ransomware is, right? Well, let's talk about ransomware just in general, right? Or data theft. Unexpected off-site backup ransomware. That's your data is no longer yours at that point. It's in the public domain, and you had no authority in letting it go into the public domain. So even if you get that back, you can't really get it back if it's gone out there. If it's out there, it's out there. You've no idea where that data is and whether it's persistent.
Yeah, I think another statement in there, Steve, as well, and whether it was Joe, whether it was the other people in the conversation, I think Joe specifically highlighted a curious position, which is, hey, as a CISO, you shouldn't be expected to understand all the laws where you operate, and the different nuances and twists to privacy practice, and especially, Simon, we're talking where you're sitting in the EU, right? It's hard to keep track of these things, and they don't always line up neatly with what's going on in the US. They rarely have. I personally find that troubling that someone who is wearing the CISO type hat would suggest that somehow it's not important to understand the rules, right? That is, I can understand why someone might say that and the way forward to an appeal. I get that. But when we're talking more objectively as we are here, when we're stepping outside the particular case, we would not want anybody walking away from us three going, oh, I shouldn't be expected to understand all the data privacy or security laws in all the states or, in the countries that I'm operating in. That is effectively kicking the chair from under yourself. I think everybody understands, you're going to sign a code of conduct that says, hey, ignorance is no excuse, right? I got to know the law. And then there are degrees. And then I'm sure to Steve's point, when you have the right people around you that are guiding you in what words to use inside your corporation, you take your everyday, I know I've got to follow the law thinking, and then you change that into something much more professional and precise that says, hey, we're in the bar, we can use that word whatever we want. But when we're sitting in here and we're in active issue management, I'm going to say issue, Steve, right? Which are the words we're going to use? Because I love what Steve's saying there. If you get the words right when you're in that crossfire of things that are going on and so much uncertainty, you have less chance that then you're suddenly trying to get the hurdle of the words right in a disclosure to the regulator because it's your common language. And it will be for a little while, people are still in their very casual way of talking about this profession. It strikes me that now when we have to get serious to put something out there in front of investors, it's a huge leap. And then guess what happens? Even in the most innocent, unintended way, someone comes along after the fact in hindsight and goes, hey, in-house, you talk about it very loosely. You talk about it in these terms. Whereas when you come to the market, you talked about it much more seriously in legal terms. And what was effectively a misuse of language very quickly becomes a probing investigation of, well, what did you really mean? Now, I don't have an opinion on what was going on with Brown and those terms that I'm going to share here. But I do understand, and I want to emphasize Steve's point, that if we don't get better at different professions, fraud and others, using words precisely in front of each other, then we're going to teach each other bad habits. And I love where you went, Steve, of, some words are not allowed and are forbidden while we're dealing with this issue. Just like in AML, we don't use the S word for suspicious until we get to a certain place in thinking. We all have our languages, and the more we can help each other use them and correct each other, I think the better we'll be.
And that's not just the difference between braces and suspenders either, is it?
No, absolutely, and it's an important difference. To Prashant's comment, I won't tell him what else I'm wearing. And on top of that, you've got other pieces around it. It's why we protect our planning. It's why we protect our exercises. It's why when we're talking, if we end up talking with the bad guys during an incident, we're doing it through counsel. Those things we have to protect, right? But if we're having conversations with counsel and we're bringing counsel in to protect those conversations because we don't want it getting out into the public domain, or we don't want it to be discoverable using legal terms again, right? So if we don't want something to be discoverable in the event of a lawsuit, if somebody sues us for not protecting their data, right, then we don't want certain things to be discoverable. We want those to be behind closed door conversations. But if so, we've got to be really careful about what we're saying in other conversations where it's not protected by attorney-client privilege. And then what we're saying in contrast out there in the public domain. Those two things can be very different. But just bearing in mind that if you're not accurately reflecting that in the public domain when you do make those statements, then you're going to be in hot water if it otherwise comes to transpire that you've made statements that are just not appropriate. If your security is shit, right? If you're not patching, if you're not even meeting your 30, 90, or even, as some cases, even beyond that, or legacy, if you're not really patching your stuff within 7 days, criticals, right? Don't leave criticals too long, right? 30 days, PCI compliance, 90 days, for anything medium, all that kind of stuff. If you're not doing that, don't tell people that you're secure, because you're inherently not, right? It doesn't matter about your configs and all the rest of it. Totally and utterly irrelevant. And, Paul and I are, British accents. I'm an American. British accents, living in the United States, right? But I've been a global leader of a massive organization, truly east to west, 160,000 people over 40 different countries, right? Actually, it was like 70 locations in 40 different countries. As a global leader, you have to be cognizant that it's not just you. It's not just where you sit at that moment in time. Data has a sovereignty. Data belongs to a geographical area. Data sovereignty is really important, and the use and permission and consent of that data is a passport. It's a visa, right? If I'm an EU citizen or a British citizen, and I give an American company consent to use that data, I'm effectively putting a stamp in that visa passport. And just like any government entity, I can revoke that visa at any time through a data deletion request, right? But just as recently as November of this year, the EU Council has adopted the Fair Access to and Use of Data Act, also known as the Data Act, right? Which builds in governance and builds in extra layers of pieces, and it governs things like, your smart coffee machines. So, again, we've got a lot to wrap our arms around as global security leaders and data owners and custodians. And to turn around and say, it's not a breach if I get the data back. Sorry. No, I don't agree. Don't agree at all.
Can I just jump in, Paul, quickly? I just want to bring this question up from Prashant, because it's pretty relevant before we sort of draw things back to the discussion points. He said, do we need, insert country, security corporate governance legislation, or whatever the country-specific terminology may be, introduced to incentivize companies to get their InfoSec in order?
Do you want me to can I go with that one, Steve?
Yeah, please, because I'm stumbling on the word incentivize, right? I'm stumbling on that, and I think I'll leave that alone, Paul. Go on.
Maybe incentivize isn't the right word.
No, but I like it.
Maybe.
I like it because it triggers the grey matter, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a great question. I'll tell you why, because we're all talking from where we sit in our perspectives on this, right, and our expertise and everything else. So when I see Price's question, here's what I go like: you've already got it. If you're publicly traded in the US, you've already got it. The incentive is, when you come to the market for money, tell us what you do, tell us what your risks are, and we'll bet on you. And when we don't like your stock price, we'll back out. So I think there is, in the US at least, it's there. And to the point I think Price just spoke, in terms of penalizing, hey, the reason why companies are struggling to be transparent with the disclosure is what, right? Because what's going to move? The stock price is going to do that. That's the fear, right? So I think the incentives, the disincentives, the penalties, not in stepping into enforcement and even prosecution in the criminal sense, I think they're all there for publicly traded companies. And for those who weren't here last time, Simon, I want to add that when it comes to the anti-fraud provisions with securities, it also applies to private companies. So if you're currently private out there and you've got big ambitions that one day you're going to be acquired or you're going to take over the world or whatever you're going to do with somebody else's money, the incentives are already there. Tell your investors, tell your private equity, tell capital, tell your board, frankly, the truth. And to Steve's point, if it's an ugly truth, then make sure the lawyer's in the room and deciding, hey, when do we want to protect this as speech that doesn't leave our place until we're ready? So on a broader business level, Prash, I think it's a great question. I say for companies, the incentive's already there. For the specific legislation, I guess, that you might be saying, or guidance, maybe there are some countries that need to do better on privacy and maybe on security on those particular verticals, if you want to call it that, or horizontals, depending on how you think of your world. And I'll leave that to Steve, but I think by and large, for me, there's enough of it there already. We don't need more regs, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
I'd
maybe
agree with
people
that.
just need to be a bit more aware of it, which is the whole point of this discussion, right?
I love that my rules are for fools posture on a lot of what I do. Paul's like, we don't need more rules. I would agree with you. There is enough out there, right? I know I'm totally plagiarizing and twisting Paul's intent there, but there is enough out there, and not only that, from an infosec. Prashant phrased it in the terms of infosec, right? So I'm gonna jump on that, incentivizing getting the infosec in order. There's so much legislation, even in the United States, east to west within the United States, decentralized government, state level regulations as well. CCPA in California, there's different rules in Massachusetts, right? There's certainly a lack of / different rules here in Florida, right? All of those pieces, right? And you've got to look at the regulation. I'm talking with a firm in Australia right now, and I've worked with lots of different banks in Australia for many, many years now. Australia is one of the most I use that term very often, over-regulated places on the planet. You want to talk about regulation, go try living in Australia or go try doing business in Australia. You'll find it incredibly difficult to do certain things without tripping over, and I use that term too, tripping over and finding yourself come afoul of so many different rules and regs. So it's really important, right? We've got enough rules and regulations out there. We should be just doing the right thing.
Yeah,
we shouldn't need incentivizing to do the right thing, because rules for fools. We shouldn't need that. If your board, if your leadership, if your management needs you to bring something with teeth to the table to get things done, that tells me what you should be telling them to do with that.
Can I take Prashant's question? But I think it's a good prompt to write something. I think that is really important to think about when we say in professions, hey, we need rules to guide us, right? Generally, and it varies by jurisdiction, but in the US, free markets and all that, you're going to find legislators are very, very uncomfortable in saying, here is the playbook and how to do it. Because they think, and we as professionals say, hey, we know risk best, right? We know fraud best. We know cyber best. We run our businesses, and you put the guardrails on and you referee us. The last thing we want, and we've all fought against this in many professions, is don't spell it out for me, because then it won't work. It won't be flexible.
And it's different. And it's different for every organisation. And it's a bit like financial services with outcomes based.
It is. I think as well, Simon, what I'd offer on the back of Prash's question for the folks who listen afterwards, when I first started thinking about cyber and how it bumps it up against fraud, 20 years ago, when I go, okay, what's this CIA thing, right? You folks have got your own language. What's that? And somebody spells it out to me. I'm like, yeah, cute acronym, went for 3 letters, right? Can we have one for 4 letters? That kind of humor we play between the professions. And someone says to me, integrity of data. And I go, okay, well, what does that mean? And they go, the data is supposed to be exactly the way it always was. And I'm like, okay, and what's the difference between that and somebody manipulates the data for fraud? And you kind of get these, well, that's not what I meant. So I think that there's a broader string to pull here, Simon, is that the cyber security, cyber risk professions have formed a language that kind of in their own house, that whether they knew it or not, they were walking all over somebody else's property, right? They were in the Sarbanes-Oxley backyard, they were in the SEC backyard. And actually, I do want to speak to you in a couple of minutes about the filing that SolarWinds made yesterday to try and make the SEC case go away. What it jumps out about is now arguing terms, right? We've claimed this as a business, or we've claimed this as a CISO, as to Steve's point, we protect this. And then somebody goes, well, actually, that word lives in another space called markets, and it lives in another piece of legislation called Sarbanes-Oxley, and it lives in another piece here. And people go, oh no, you don't get to oversee me. And to be, a little bit farcical about it, I think the regulator will be sitting there going back and go, hey guys, you picked the words. You decided what your business was. You decided what you come to the markets for it. And if you didn't know that this technicality was sitting over there, I'm sorry, that's on you. Go learn the rules a little bit. So if I can, Sam, I just want to go one step further, because I think it is interesting for the folks that are there. So when we were getting on today, I was surprised to find that Bloomberg was the only outlet that was covering SolarWinds SEC summary judgment. For those that are not familiar, summary judgment, if you're being prosecuted or if you're in civil cases, your first effort to knock the case out, right? Your lawyers are going to get up and say, there's not enough here for this to go the distance. And so what the journalist in Bloomberg does really well is, first of all, they put a public link to the actual summary judgment document. It's there. And if you don't have it, I'll make sure you folks get it. But when you look through it, there's something, you're on top of it, Simon, there's something that jumps out at my eyes that I would hope jumps out at everybody else's. One of the main defenses in there is, hey, SEC, you don't really have jurisdiction here, right? You don't get to referee our game. You don't get to say we're about cyber. And as I answered before, it's because the SEC says we don't care about cyber. We care about publicly traded companies. So you're in scope. What is in there that talks about, hey, you can't look at internal controls? And I wanted to cover this, Simon, because a couple of you folks asked about audit and internal controls last time. We promised to take care of it. The defense for, I guess, for Brown and for SolarWinds says, I'm sorry, you're using this set of rules about internal controls that are all about corrupt payments. Well, no. But if you're reading that without the lens that I think we all look to experts for to bring this, you'd be missing this. So yes, we do have internal controls to deal with from the 1970s foreign corrupt payments, right? The foreign corrupt payments. And we do that all the way back to Watergate, right? Before, Simon, I think some of us were on the planet, right? We don't want corporations making payments that make government officials do bad things. But then we had a thing called Enron, right? And Enron says, hang on a minute, we're not going to build a whole new mechanism. We're going to take that existing requirement for companies to have good records across their systems and across their transactions, and we're going to put another layer on it called Sarbanes-Oxley, and we're going to say, hey, Simon, company, not only do you not make those kind of payments and have internal controls for it, but you're going to spread those internal controls over a whole bunch of more things called financial reporting and assets, physical and financial. And so when I read that pushback from SolarWinds, it's half right, but it's not the whole thing. So we're not lawyers and we're not here to sort of give legal advice, but I really wanted the group here, when they're out there talking about, SolarWinds fights back and, this kind of staging and exciting new stuff, get yourself the source documents through programs like this and come out to people and say, is this the full picture? Because if not, I don't want to take it into my organization. I don't want to teach my up and coming teams. I don't want to give it to my SOC analysts, or I want to give them fact because I don't want them to get scared of this thing. And I don't want to leave the profession because they're not getting enough unquote truth. So I think there's a lot there, Simon, but I really encourage your folks who are picking up on this to have a look at that hearing that's on today. Look at how it falls out between SolarWinds saying, hey, judge, tell them to leave us alone. It'll play out next week. And then let's have a look at some of the arguments that are being made, because again, it's refusing to play the fraud game. It's refusing to fully embrace, internal controls. And I think to the question before, it's trying to draw a story that says, hey, we're just cyber and we're different and you don't get to oversee us. So Steve, I'm going to throw you a wing as soon as we threw Simon one earlier on, if I can. If someone like SolarWinds says, hey, SEC, and prevails, you're not authorized to oversee cybersecurity, then who's the regulator that is? Because I had a look around this morning and I couldn't find one. Have you got one in mind?
It may not surprise you that there really isn't a governing regulation, because at the end of the day, every single business is different. I work for, and I'm the board appointed security officer for a company that handles payment cards. Right? I don't mean PCI. I mean the actual issuance of those cards, and mechanizing, the ability to transfer money, outside of borders. So, okay, what does that mean? Well, we're not really processing transactions. We defer that to somebody else. So PCI DSS, not really, and it's not regulation. It's an industry standard. Okay, however, AML, KYC, all anti-money laundering, know your customer. Those are all laws. Those are all things that I have to comply with, right? And we're talking about international cross-border money transfer potentially. So in that mode, it's not just United States, it's everywhere, right? I bought something recently that my mom turned around and said, I'll buy you that. Merry Christmas. You get it. I'll send you the money. Okay, that's fine. That used to happen instantaneously. And then post 9/11, that's a US-based terrorist event. My mom is in the UK, but money doesn't transfer quite as quickly anymore. It doesn't pass through the banking system quite as quickly anymore. Why? Because everybody internationally has to monitor, why is this person moving money over here?
Yeah.
And what is that amount? And could it be considered under the realms and terms of anti-money laundering, right? If you're moving money around, there's so many things that, it's just one facet of one business that I work with, right? On the other side of the shop, I work with a different business, a different organization where I'm building a security program for them. And they're not in the business of handling any payments whatsoever. There's none of that data flows through their environment. But what do? They offer services out to other companies everywhere in the world. And those services involve securing data, securing endpoints. They offer penetration testing, those kind of pieces. So we have to be cognizant of, well, what does that mean? How does the business supply their customers, and how do I secure it appropriately? I can't put a tag on that and say, well, security for company A, cybersecurity, is going to look completely the same as security for company B, because security for company B is totally different than company A. And I'll throw security for company C in there as well, because they're a distribution and logistics company with absolutely bog all infrastructure, but they have warehouses and trucks and people, and they're operating in areas where there's a risk of hurricanes, flooding, even in some cases the world, volcanoes. So all of a sudden my security then leans a little bit away from cyber and leans more into geopolitical risk, natural hazards risk, right? And that's now we've gone into risk management and security. It's all about life safety at that point. Well, there's a lot of laws that govern life safety. OSHA here in the United States, ELF, see, I'm making it seasonal, ELF and safety back in the UK, right? I mean, it's like, oh, look at the groaning, terrible. There's loads of Grinches and Scrooges on this call. But you see what I mean? It's like, I can't turn around, Paul, and say, I'm governed by X. As a security leader, I'm actually not. The business is governed by X, and as a security leader, I'm a service arm to that business. But the industry has very, very little governance for practitioners as far as cybersecurity is concerned.
And thank you for batting it, Stephen. I think you took it exactly where I wanted you to take it. Right? You got to sit down and think about it. And yeah, you got to sit down and think about it. And if you've not, as a cybersecurity professional, figure out which referees you have to respond to and which games you're playing in simultaneously for yourself, go figure it out. Because if you don't know, the first time I come back to you, and I share that song, someone pinged me during the week of, hey, I'm a company, whatever, we're not SolarWinds, but hey, we sell a product to whatever industries, exactly the same way that Steve described, right? They're a supply chain player. And they said, hey, I think some of our products are in banks. Does that mean that the OCC and the FDIC and the banking regulators around the world will be interested in us? Of course they are, because they're coming the other way through the third-party supply chain thinking for banks, right? And so I think, it's not to pick on the particular SolarWinds response, but when you say, hey, you, the SEC, are not fit to regulate us, I think, first of all, you're poking a bear and you don't want to do that. But second, you've got to then be able to have a more educated conversation of, have you thought out what you do, and to Steve's point, who you touch, and then which regulators are you potentially playing on their space? And then more importantly, do you have relationships with them? I saw someone here posted all the different enforcement agencies. Great. You'll be sitting down with the Bureau and FSI, SACS, and others in the US and likewise in the UK and going, hey, I want you to be part of my tabletop. I want you to sort of rehearse this with me, and how would we play with you, and who would call, and when would we call? That's great. Okay, so then who sat down and talked with their regulator before they have an event, right? Oh, no, we don't talk to those people. Guys, newsflash, federal agencies and regulators sort of sit somewhere in the same building, right? They talk to each other. And as the bureau's out there handling their incidents, the regulator's going to turn around and go, well, what did you see while you're in there, right? Are they on top of this, or do we have to get involved in it? So I think it's a space that's got a lot of strands to it. You just wanted to respond directly to that.
Thanks, Paul. One thing we haven't talked about, which I know is on the list, is about internal and external audits. Are you going to cover that off, Paul?
Maybe I'll take the. What I find interesting about the where we left off at the last meeting, but I think bringing it in here, is there's a lot of talk of the CISO did something right or wrong, the board, and then the market. And I'm looking at that and going, well, we're all the other people in here. And, we all spend a fair amount of time in platforms like LinkedIn, and not surprisingly, everyone's thrown up an opinion of what the org chart should be, right, all the way up to the CEO. I think what I find interesting in this conversation is I want to hear in the SolarWinds conversation, and others to Steve's point, where was internal audit in this? Where were they, what were they geared to do? What risks were they looking after? What did the chief audit executive say to the CISO and say, what do you want me to go out there and kick the tires on while I'm out there? What are the key risks we're looking for? And is my testing enough? In return, right, that activity by the audit teams is supposed to filter into, okay, this is now what we tell the market as a public company, right? And I think, we've not heard that slice of the story yet in the SolarWinds one, but I think it's coming. But while we've not heard it, if you're in this space now going, hang on a minute, how do we protect the CISO if you're over there? Or how do we do better risk management? Wherever you are on this continuum, you should be sitting down with your internal audit partners who are going to give you that extra coat of paint on what are the regs, because they sit there every day. And more importantly, if you've been pushing them off and going, I don't want audit in my business, right? I don't have the time for that. I don't welcome those findings. Now is the time maybe to build that bridge and a different relationship of, I need you, the audit team, to keep me safe of, is it actually running the way I think it's running? And I'm just going to say, and Steve, maybe you can grab this, it's less audit to regs, it's audit to risk, right? We have a lot of audit teams that are kind of flat-footing their way around there. Did the music come back on, Steve? Flat-footing their way around.
No, I'm dancing to your beat, Paul. I'm dancing to your beat.
I love it. You keep going. I'll keep singing it. But I think that's really important. And I think that was something that I've seen more than once in cyber breakdowns, Simon, is when you get to the audit team, what you hear from the auditors is the business only let me kick the tires on the rules and the regs, and I wasn't invited to go much further. And I think the better auditors have pushed their way past that and said, rules and regs are minimum standard. And the rules and regs are always outdated and they're never sufficient. So I'm going to audit you against the risk that we're actually dealing with. And I'm going to try and give you a sense of, are we anywhere close to managing the risk? Because you yourself can't mark your own homework, as I say, and I, the auditor, can mark your homework, right? So I think there's a huge piece there in internal audit. Steve, let me push it to you, and then maybe we'll cover off the external audit bit as well.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I jump in quick? Because I'm conscious we've got like 7 or 8 minutes left. We've got tons still to cover, but we've also got Mr. Josh Mason, friend of mine, quite well known in the industry, making some comments in the chat. And hey Josh, especially the FBI one, I've got a feeling Steve might want to address that, and then we'll address the next one that he's brought up, which I think we were talking about earlier on.
I can play both of these. I can play the internal audit piece leading right into the FBI piece.
Perfect.
Because this is interesting, right? And hey, Justin, thanks for the high five and copious exclamation marks. So, internal audit has to be a partner. I was forced to learn this. I always considered auditors to be the enemy until I reached a certain level in my career, and then my boss, who was fortunately, he was an incredible mentor to me in the latter stages of my career as I became an executive. He turned around to me and he said, "Okay, I'm going to be stepping away. I'm going to be stepping out. I'm going to help you get to where I need you to be, so that when I go, you're the new me." Right. And in that, he turned around and he had a very educative discussion with me to say, make internal audit your best friend. Give them things to do. Partner with them, right? Because we use PwC as our internal auditor. So it may seem a little bit odd that outsourcing your internal audit, but it's very common in public companies. So PwC was our internal auditor. Deloitte was our SOX auditor, putting it into US terms again. But it's the same universally. And importantly, especially during the breach that we had, it's in our 8Ks, public knowledge, go look, right? A cybersecurity incident. During that entire process, internal audit worked with me like that, transparently. And then post-incident, remediation, recovery, eradication, hardening, right? Enhancements and hardening, right? Internal audit was the ones that drove that. Why? Because then it would be tracked. And it would be reported. We could then say, look, we have taken all these steps that was highlighted during the findings, lessons learned. We have taken them. It's now documented. It's a documentation. It's a statement of fact, right? And importantly, give internal audit, become internal audit's best friend, partner with internal audit, because if you don't, If you don't give them things to do, they'll go out and find it because they're incentivized and they're monetized to find problems that they can help you fix, right? So help them help you. And on the back end of that, assuming the FBI does anything with incidents, I have been a very solid cooperation and partner with the FBI ever since 9/11, when they solidified and created the fusion centers, and now the public-private partnership. I'm a member of InfraGard. I work with Department of Homeland Security, CISA. Why? Because it's really, really important, and I drive this home whenever I'm doing tabletops. Make sure at some point during your incident response plan, there is always that component of go tell the FBI. Go tell local law enforcement. Why? You operate within a certain jurisdiction. So always make sure you tell local law enforcement, and then always make sure you tell the FBI. Why? Because it will cross boundaries. If you're across the rest of the world, Europol, Interpol, right? There's always a component that you can reach out to because a crime has been committed. Something has been stolen, or your intellectual property or your systems or your infrastructure has been breached, and there are laws against that. So tell law enforcement. If somebody breaks into your house, why wouldn't you call the cops? You may have 1,000,001 reasons for shiny red lamps in your basement or whatever it may be, or powder on your coffee table. There are reasons why you might not tell law enforcement, but you should. And if you do tell the FBI, I guarantee that they're going to do something about it. They have thresholds, right? If it's below a certain monetary value or whatever it may be, then they'll put it appropriately within their queue and within who deals with it. But regardless, tell them. And why do I say that? Because we contacted the FBI early in an incident. The FBI not only helped us, internationally, working with international law enforcement agencies, the FBI apprehended a courier coming through the Ukraine that was holding our crap, and they caught him. And that resulted in the entire takedown of that entire group. And we got a phone call from the FBI. Hey, Company A, do you want your stuff back? Because we've got it right here. If we hadn't told the FBI, tried to keep it quiet, tried to keep it secret, then we'd never have got that back. And there's a whole lot of things I could tell you about how awesome it was that we got all that stuff back, right? Key points, Simon's laughing because he's heard this story, but the key points around this, right? I'm not telling you on a public forum on YouTube, but key points around all of this is to say, tell the FBI, they're your friends, they're not your enemy. Tell local law enforcement, they're your friends, they're not your enemy, right? Key pieces around that. So don't want to eat up too much time on that, but that's why I wanted to jump on that. You've got to understand. I
think what I'd like to do quickly, I see that Josh is also an InfraGard member as well. I'm going to drop, Steve, yours and Paul's LinkedIn profiles in the chat and suggest that you all connect with each other.
Please do connect with us and keep the conversation going. There's only so much we can fit into an hour, and Paul has a lot of insights. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met, especially in this field, and it's definitely worth engaging and having a conversation. And I'm sure, Simon, we came and had this session because there was so much to unpack from the first one. We're going to have so much more, and as Paul said, we're leading the charge here. We're getting out in front of the news, and we're getting out in front of the messaging around the SEC and everything with SolarWinds. You're kind of hearing it here first in a lot of ways. So stay tuned, and there's going to be a lot more to come. Sorry, Paul.
Paul, we've got about 3 minutes left. We've got so much to cover that we're probably not going to cover. So shall we do a quick summary and then a recap of what we're going to talk about after Christmas on the next one?
Absolutely. I just wanted to add 30 seconds on what Steve mentioned this time. Don't just talk to the DOJ. I think if anyone is in the US, and many of you are, or you companies traded in the US, or you're a supplier to somewhere in the US, right? There's no dodging the US jurisdiction question, even for you, Simon. I think the point I want to make is have a look at what the SEC had to say today about the new cybersecurity disclosures. Don't read the whole thing, read the last paragraph, because it says something like this. We're not in gotcha mode. We understand that people are just starting to react to this disclosure stuff, and you're not going to have it right. You're not going to have the language right. You're not going to have the players right. You're not going to have the policies right. You've probably been doing it wrong. And more importantly, the SEC, and people might go, oh no, I'm never going to call the SEC. The SEC staff are available to your companies to answer questions. So the worst thing you do, and I can tell you this from 20 years in regulatory industries, if the first time you talk to the regulator is you think you had it all right and maybe you realize you hadn't, it's not good. It's better to go to them early now while
Head it,
they're in
front
that
it up.
year rollout and go, hey, we
Yeah.
think we've got it stood up, but we just want you to kick the tires. They're not going to prove your program, but they're going to give you enough hints that say, here's
Yeah.
something for you to work on this year, and hopefully they'll remember you when in fact they come and knock on your door later.
Good point. Good point. Do you want to summarize quickly, Paul, what we've talked about, and then give people a teaser for what we're going to talk about after Christmas?
Absolutely. One, if you didn't watch show 1 about the whole breach and everything else, please watch it because I think it's a good intro. 2, there's a lot of reactionary conversation going on out there with CISOs, about CISOs, for CISOs and everybody else. Please remember, everybody has an agenda. Everybody wants what they want out of it. So listen to lots of them. And more importantly, Simon, come and listen to your audience as well, where you're bringing different perspectives on. 3, I think, try to get out of that mode of reacting to Steve's point. There are CISOs who are pretty calm at this, have been around a long while. And if you're finding yours is reacting, go and use the network. Go talk to other people, get other CISOs' perspectives. 4, don't get sucked up in word as the CISO report. Boy, could we spend another 2 shows on that, right? And I think we will, Steve. That's one for next time.
Please, let's spend a show on that. Please.
No. And
I'm gonna upset the apple cart with a frag grenade if we do that.
And although my fine jar for Steve only has $3 in it, Steve, for this particular show, I'm going to say it, Simon, just get comfortable using the F word, right? And when you use it, understand what you're actually saying, just like the B word for breach and I for integrity and all the rest of it. Before you say words in a professional space, know what they mean, not just in your world, but in other people's world. And if you've claimed a little bit more territory than actually you know how to oversee, start dealing with that now before it comes and bites you. So.
Perfect. Steve, any closing remarks on that?
Oh, hell no, I'm not touching that.
Thanks, Bobby.
I don't believe you.
Just wanted to say happy holidays, Simon. Thanks for bringing us on, and hopefully we'll, as we field more of these questions, we'll come back in the new year if that's how you choose. So.
I'd love that. Thank you both for coming on again. It's been super insightful for me. There's a lot of this that I understand. I'm not saying that I don't understand the usual conversations I have, but I kind of don't sometimes. But when we're talking about regulation and principles-based and outcome-based stuff, you're talking my language. So it's been nice to be involved in a conversation where I've known probably 60% of what you were talking about, which is a win for me. And the more I think the audience, myself and other people who perhaps not completely up to speed in the fraud space, especially, the more you listen to these guys speak and impart their knowledge and wisdom, the more we learn and the more we can improve as an industry. That's kind of my closing remark. But
yeah, and we're not always right, and importantly, don't be afraid of the person who changes their mind. Be afraid of someone who's incapable of change.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. Sorry, I was trying to do 2 things at once then. So yeah, thank you to everyone who's tuned in. I would say I wish you a Merry Christmas, but we're back. We've got 4 shows next week, kicking off on.
Man is non-stop.
Kicking off on the 19th. We're changing things up a bit for next year, in that you're not going to see me on every show. You'll be pleased to know we're bringing in guest speakers to host their own shows. Josh Mason is one of them. Jacob Friedman, who I know you know, Steve, he's going to be coming on with Ron from Hacker Valley Media in the new year. And next week, we've got Jay Tilson and John Spiegel from the SSE Forum talking about the 3 ghosts of SSE. And I think they're bringing some heavyweight guests on with them as well. I think they've got Dr. Chase Cunningham, you have Jenny Karam, and I can't actually remember who the other one is, but pretty good session picks up there. And then on the 20th, we've got Mr. Greg Vandergast, Tales from the VAR side. So talking about what value-added resellers are doing well, and perhaps knowing, Greg, what they're not particularly doing well. We'll probably focus on that quite a lot. And then we've got
for the gifted favorite Foresight cartoon.
100%. And then on the 21st, we are back with Cypago, an Israeli startup called Beyond Boundaries, revolutionizing cyber GRC for a resilient future. So I hope to see you all next week. In the meantime, have an absolutely amazing weekend, everyone. I'm now going to go and get a hot water bottle and snuggle up with the blanket and see you all really soon. Thanks, guys. See you later.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.